What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, August 13th, 2018, getting through the month of August, coming up on my 66th birthday, and that's kind of a little depressing myself. Of course, the alternative is even more depressing. I may even take a few days off around my birthday because I need a rest from all of this insanity here. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in the control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions here. And I noticed the corporate media is still going on about this young lady, Molly Tibbetts, and it's obviously a shame, whatever it is that's happened to her. I mean, unless she just decided to run away, go off with some guy or something like that. But this long after her disappearance, I'm not hopeful that she's going to be found in a good condition. But as tragic as it is, the amount of time they're spending on this story, it's part of the condensation effort. They're using the story so they don't have to report on other things like what's going on in Yemen, what's really going on with the economy, and so forth and so on. It's being used as a distraction. And again, I don't mean to trivialize what has happened to this young lady or to diminish the pain and anguish her family must be going through right now. But this sort of corporate media behavior, we've seen it before many, many times here. So let's get into the talking points right now, starting with the war zones here. Over in Syria, the Tiger forces are deploying in northern Latakia, and they've achieved a series of local successes in their framework of their operation against ISIS cells in the province of al-Suwaida. And the Syrian Arab Army, the National Defense Forces, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party restored control of the administrative border over the province after they cleared about 400 square kilometers in the eastern part and besieged the remaining ISIS members in the area of Safa. And today, they've launched a final push to purge the ISIS terrorists in this area. So again, this is all but over. This is the mop up. This is the cleanup operation. And apparently, on August 10th and August 11th, end of last week, at least 3 convoys of the Tiger forces were en route to northern Hama. They included battle tanks, OTR-21 Toka tactical ballistic missile launchers, UR-77 mine-clearing vehicles, BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launchers, vehicles armed with machine guns, a large number of artillery pieces and other equipment. So it's going to be a bad night for those ISIS fighters. So let's all feel bad for ISIS. They're in for a rough time here. So let's see. Now, Brigadier General Lance R. Bunch, who's the top U.S. air commander in Afghanistan, is saying that the Islamic State in Afghanistan is harboring intentions to attack the West. And they're trying to establish their own caliphate in the eastern Afghan province of Nangarhar, along the Pakistan border, considered the group's primary stronghold in the region. Well, there's a reason for that. The eastern part of Afghanistan is very mountainous, and they've got the home court advantage. It's very hard to get in there with mechanized gear. And I'm sure that General Bunch is trying to fight the war from the air, but as we learned in Vietnam, you cannot win a war from the air. You have to have the boots on the ground. What I see this is the U.S. is pretty much lost in Syria, and they are certainly not winning in Afghanistan. And they're afraid of having a second, didn't quite get there in their war agenda, because Syria has proven the United States is not invincible, that they are in fact a paper tiger, and it's already having geopolitical repercussions. And so the U.S. is looking to go back into Afghanistan to prove how butch they are, and they need an excuse. So Islamic State is harboring intentions to attack the West, just like Assad had sarin gas and Saddam had nuclear weapons. And we know that this is nonsense because the West was financing and supporting ISIS. That's already come on out many, many times from many different sources. So this is a piece of propaganda designed to sell the American people on the need to go back into Afghanistan yet again, just like we've had to go back into Iraq again and again and again. Now, looking at that little tiff that's going on between Canada and Saudi Arabia, last week I was saying Saudi Arabia appeared to be overreacting, and it was kind of hard to understand why. But apparently analysts are saying what's going on is that Saudi Arabia is using Canada to send a message to the entire world. They're making an example of Canada, and according to Nader Hashimi, director of the University of Denver Center for Middle East Studies, what's going on here is Saudi Arabia is sending the message, if you want to do business with us, you don't talk about our human rights record. We're willing to do business with anybody, but there are lines that you do not cross. That's apparently coming down right from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman himself. But other analysts are saying this could actually backfire because the rather abrupt termination of business with Canada over what seems to be a rather minor issue to the rest of the world could actually discourage other nations from wanting to do business inside Saudi Arabia or with Saudi Arabia, and it could actually backfire on them. And it's going to make investors very, very nervous that all of a sudden they could lose their investment for no real reason at all. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Over in Iran, as you know, there is Trump has been dropping hints that he wants to talk to Iran's government, and Iran's government is coming on back and saying, no, not until the sanctions are lifted and we go back to the nuclear deal. And Supreme Leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khamenei, is saying Iran will not sit down at the negotiating table with Washington, and declared a ban on any talks with the United States. And I love that metaphor they used last week. You know, you don't stab somebody in the back and then say that you want to have talks with them without pulling that knife back out first. And that really gets to the heart of the matter. So they're accusing the U.S. of basically not operating in good faith. In the matter of negotiations, they say the U.S. is playing a poor game. One of them says negotiations with preconditions. The other one says negotiations without preconditions. And again, this sends a message to the rest of the world. Nobody's sure who's really in charge. Because it's like that situation with Russia, where Trump sends Rand Paul to hand deliver a message to Putin saying, we want to ratchet down the tensions and go back to working toward a good relationship. At the same time, the State Department throws sanctions onto Russia over the Skripal poisoning, for which there is absolutely zero evidence that Russia had anything to do with it. And that also sends that same message. Who's really running the show here? And a lot of people can be forgiven for thinking that President Trump has lost control of his own administration. Now, former president of Georgia and current governor of Odessa, Saakashvili, is saying that Poroshenko, when he leaves the presidency of Ukraine, he is likely to face criminal prosecution by his own patron state, the United States of America. And he was giving an interview with the Ukrainian site Strana. Saakashvili was saying that as soon as he ceases to be president, not a single country will take him in for a moment. In America, they will plant him in prison like Lazarenko because the FBI has a dossier on him. And as the U.S. has proved with people like, well, Saddam Hussein, being an ally one day doesn't mean you're not going to be an enemy the next. Let's take a phone call from Layla in Canada. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. Obviously, Khamenei is absolutely right. Would anybody sit down to any negotiations when they're already being punished for something by the party with whom they're supposed to be negotiating with as an equal? Trump is either a complete idiot, has betrayed the public, or is just a puppet that's owned and operated by the globalists, whoever they are. I just think this whole thing is absurd, and I think we have to prepare ourselves for the inevitable. We are headed for a war. The question is, how far will it reach to North America? I'd like to hear your reaction to that observation.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. I mean, whoever is behind this negotiations with preconditions, they're trying the bully approach. We're going to negotiate from a position of absolute power where you will have no choice but to give us what we want. And then afterwards, maybe we'll do something nice for you. But having unilaterally pulled out of the nuclear deal, the United States is basically seen as untrustworthy. And again, these mixed signals that countries like Iran and Russia are getting are sending out the message that the U.S. government is actually in a bit of chaos. And it's not really clear who's really calling the shots, especially in our foreign policy. Trump is trying to do one thing. He's being sandbagged by his own State Department. And that sets up a situation where people in other countries don't know who they should be listening to.
Well, I'll hazard a guess, and I'd say that the U.S. is not setting U.S. foreign policy, that the U.S. and Canada have been occupied from within for decades, if not from their inception. Whether, if one talks about mental illness on the individual scale, what do you call it when it's an entire government that is in mental chaos, if it cannot show that it is capable of putting one foot in front of the other and walking in one path consistently? And that path involves a degree of honesty and speaking what is actually truthful. They're just setting up Iran, and Iran is way too wise to fall into this trap. And because Iran will not yield, Russia is wavering. Turkey will not stand by silently. Bashar al-Assad has people already ready. Jordan's King Hussein is a traitor, just like his grandfather. So that person is utterly untrustworthy, except he's got a huge Palestinian population, and possibly many of the Bedouins are going to resent the betrayal. It's also unpredictable. Everything's up in the air. And this fool, Trump, who really is more than a disappointment, I don't know, I'm beginning to wonder if we have to get rid of him first. I mean, I was looking at a video yesterday of Huey Long, and it's been as far back. I'm sure you're aware of the Long brothers.
Yes.
Huey Long was a brilliant man, apparently, and he was talking as far back as when he was in power, that it's okay for some people to be rich, but rich only to a certain extent, as long as every man has a house to live in and a pot to put his chicken in. Now, today, pardon my crudity, but if someone doesn't have a pot within which to empty their bladder, how are they going to have a pot to put their chicken? People have been so utterly beaten down, and we're so busy, so confused, and they've introduced an element of greater confusion by bringing in so-called enemies so that we don't know anymore which way we're going. The men that were men, oh, by the way, on that issue of why men are less masculine and the drop in testosterone, I wonder if the birth control pill had a lot to do with that. A lot of women were on the birth control pill for years, and many of them even got pregnant while they were on the birth control pill. Yes. That must have had some effect. I know before my husband and I planned a pregnancy, I did not take the birth control pill for 6 months and started only eating carefully organic food and avoiding public water. And I have to say, I have a very masculine son, but who also minds his own business. doesn't get into fights. But we don't have a strong force to counter whatever is going to be coming our way. And the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get. I think the inevitable, the writing is on the wall, if I may use an old cliche.
Yes.
It's time to be prepared. And now how that is, I don't know, because we've been broken down into so many antagonistic parts that it's hard for us to reach any form of cohesion. And who do we turn to? Can we trust the U.S. Army to act in our interests? Can Canada, who has always relied on and been a parasite on the U.S., despite the fact that they won't acknowledge it, and they presume to be equals with the U.S., the world, basically, the free world has relied upon the U.S. Do we now turn to Vladimir Putin? Where do we go? Do we turn to China? I don't think so. I think China's the one who scraped up the bodies that they crushed in Tiananmen Square. I'm not ready to trust this regime anymore. So where do we go? What do we do? Do we just sit by and wait for the brick wall to fall on us?
Well, again, I do not advocate any kind of violence or revolution. I don't think the American people are ready for that. I know that there are people who are trying to start violence in the street, but I think it's for all the wrong motives, like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and everything. But again, my best analysis is that the U.S. government is heading for a Soviet Union-style collapse. And that's really what we have to be preparing for right now, not just to get through the period of hardship following the collapse, but also to make sure that we, the people, are the ones who design the next government, the next country that sits on these lands.
May I disagree with you on that point? First of all, I'm not exactly sure what happened post-Soviet collapse. I think it did not affect us so much so that and I may well have been too busy traveling or involved in parties and revelry. I don't really know what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed, but I do know what happened prior to the Second World War in Austria.
Yes.
And I think I sent you some material. You probably have not had time to look at it. Kim Philby, all the journalists in Austria at that time were working for not all, those that we know of. I was reading the article of a Soviet Union spy who talked about, he didn't acknowledge being a Soviet Union spy, but when I read his writing saying he helped Kim Philby and Kim Philby's new Jewish communist wife escape, I knew what was going on. And I do remember that when I was being recruited to be a counter spy against the PFLP, the Mossad, when I said, no, I don't want to get involved, I want to be a journalist, I'm here only to learn the geopolitics. And they said, hey, you want to be a journalist? That can be arranged. So clearly, those are the people, as we all now realize belatedly, that we cannot trust because they've led us down the garden path.
Well, you know about Operation Mockingbird, right?
I know the name, but I don't know the details.
Operation Mockingbird is a program that was started by the CIA right at the end of World War II. They basically studied how the Nazis controlled the media. They had total control over the media, and they set up basically the same system. And the goal of Mockingbird was, and remains to this very day, is that all the top management of all the media are CIA assets, so that they can basically control what gets published or broadcast and what gets buried. And one of the reasons they don't like the independent media is they don't have that kind of control over the independent media.
You know, when I worked in the U.S., and I worked in many cities, I had the privilege as a Canadian citizen to have worked in many cities in the U.S. We were wonderful in every town, every newsroom I ever worked in. We were wonderful when it came to dealing with local issues and local news. The only time that there was horrendous repression when there was a guy who was trying to incite people not to pay their taxes, their federal taxes. That guy was, this was in Grand Rapids. I'll never forget what happened to him.
Okay, Layla, stay on the phone. Going to put you on hold. Got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to bring you back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Layla in Canada. And Layla, Can you just sort of pick up where you left off? I mean, we were talking about the media. We're talking about government control of the media, which is pretty much an open secret now. We're talking about Operation Mockingbird. Yeah. And along with Mockingbird, other intelligence agencies get involved in controlling the media as well, such as the FBI.
Yes. There, unfortunately, all of the institutions in what we used to believe was the free world have been infiltrated and polluted. And the problem is we don't know how deeply the decay goes. And again, the other thing is we've all fallen into the net, we've taken the bait, and too many people have become part of Facebook and Twitter, and basically we've become twits. And of course, the food that we eat, the chemicals around us have had dire implications. Vaccines, all of those have had dire implications on our mental functioning. Clarity is a very difficult thing for many people to maintain, and I see that all the time when I speak with people who are not selective about what they eat or what they take from the medical industry. And talk about the industrial complex. The medical industrial complex is far more dangerous to us today than the military industrial complex, because they've got everything pretty well organized with regard to how they have approached it. We're almost at the point of no retreat, really, of no salvation. There is one thing I do want to say. Forgive me for saying this. I want to take a position of disagreement with you when you said last week that Ivanka Trump is beautiful.
Yeah.
Have you looked at any pictures? Have you been able to find any pictures of her as a girl? I've only seen one, and she was actually a very plain-looking girl. She is a Barbie doll because she is highly plasticized. And the same with Melania.
Well, this is getting a little personal. This is getting a little personal.
I'm sorry. I know, but the problem is the ideology of sending out beautiful people to. I agree. It sounds personal, and it would be personal if it was just an ordinary person. But if she's campaigning for Donald Trump, who is himself a failure. Now, I admire Melania because she stayed out of the picture. I suspect she resents it. But it was Ivanka Trump who was in Jerusalem, dedicating Jerusalem to Israel. And in that sense, she is no longer personal. She is no longer a private person. If somebody is campaigning, they're fair game.
They're fair game for comments about their actions and their politics, but I don't believe in getting personal, even with public figures. And I decry this cultural attitude right now of just, hurling insults instead of rational arguments at your opponents.
I'm not insulting her. I'm not insulting her.
No, I was making a general observation.
Oh, I agree with you. Now, had she been a private person, I would be way out of line. But if she's going to be campaigning, then it's another issue altogether. If she were not, hey, we talk about Hillary Clinton. We talk about Maxine Waters and the ages of how they might be senile. We talk about all of those other people. Just because somebody is successful. It's easy to be successful when you start out rich. And it's also easy to exploit your position. First of all, she was not elected. She should not even be in the White House. And I think that is a fair comment. But if she's going to be out there campaigning for her father because her father is such a liability, then we have to look at who it is that is sending out the message. And that's what I'm talking about. So this adoration of someone who is beautiful because of their appearance and therefore is going to be perceived with a great deal less critical thinking. This is the problem. She's very charming. These people are all extremely well rehearsed, very well trained. I, who have worked in the industry, I never had the luxury of thousands of dollars of consultants per hour training me, but many people have within the industry, and this is the case. And appearances are crucial when it's a mask. If you're wearing a mask that was created by cosmetic surgery and you are speaking rehearsed monologue, then that is fair game because it's going to influence a lot of people. And someone who it's like a cute little kitten. You know, that may actually be a lion in disguise. I mean, we just don't know.
No, we don't know. We don't know. The point I'm making is, you know, we talk about what she's saying, you know, the ideas behind it and the policies behind it. That's fine. It's when we start making basically personal attacks, attacking her for her appearance, making comments about plastic surgery. To me, that crosses a bit of a line. And I realize I'm probably one of the, I'm almost alone in that, in our current culture, because we're seeing it among all of our politicians and our media, especially out in the Twitterverse. They're just screaming insults at each other. Anyway, Layla, got to take another commercial break. Have to let you go here. Got more callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right back to the phones. Steve Elkins, aloha. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Well, I'd say that you're not alone, Michael. I don't like the personal attacks on the person themselves as far as their looks go. I care less about that. Focus more on their policies, their failure of policies, or the corruption that surrounds them, like Hillary and Maxine Waters. But I'm with you on that. I don't like the personal attacks on how they look and how they're, you know, that's trivial in my book as far as I'm concerned. But I wanted to make a comment on Layla's observation on the lack of masculinity in our young men. And then I noticed that about a year ago, going back to Indiana, and my wife and I watching a couple of stores, retail stores, and we noticed the young men there. They were working display cases and stuff, and they were overtly feminine, very, very feminine, obviously very gay. I mean, the mannerisms were all there. Their characteristics, their hips, or their hands, or legs, everything about them was more female than male. And we walked out of there, both of us in the medical field. So we walked out thinking, what is happening here that we're seeing more young males looking more femalish than they are male, masculine? And we started kicking it around a little bit, and I know a couple scientists, and I threw a couple things at them. I said, is it possible, this is just a theory, I have nothing to back it up, just a theory, that possibly some of these vaccines may be given at the time they're going through puberty, maybe tweaking the estrogen and suppressing the testosterone, and we're seeing more males that with less testosterone and more female characteristics because they have more estrogen basically enhanced. I don't know. It's something definitely to investigate. I am very suspicious. It's come on, and we've added more vaccines. We are seeing the autism and the correlation there with the young children and the vaccines, but now you got to start to wonder if we're doing something also, some harm, genetic harm, on the DNA as far as the hormones of estrogen and testosterone. I wonder if we're doing something there with that, with the increasing all the number of vaccines. We keep adding more and more.
Well, there's another possibility as well. It's known that a lot of chemicals that are in common usage as food additives or personal cosmetics or products are endocrine disruptors, and they could also be feminizing men.
Yeah, it's. I mean, back in my days, you and I are about close to the same age, but you saw once in a while a teenager your age that showed some female characteristics, and you thought, well, he probably is, and nobody bothered him. They stayed to themselves. But now you walk around and you see so many teenagers, so many young men that are overtly feminized and the mannerisms, and they don't try to hide anything. It's just, I mean, even out in California before I left, the high school there near us had a gay club, and I think that's starting to be something that's popping up around the country. They're saying, hey, it's kind of we have more of them, so let's let them have clubs. It's kind of odd, but that's when I left California.
Well, when I was in college, they had a gay students union there, and we're talking back in the 70s. Part of it may actually be social pressure. In this gender bender age here, boys are actually being actively encouraged to move away from that masculine model. Maleness is being looked down on. And so they may be basically going for a gender neutral look, not because they're actually that way, but just because that's the new social expectation.
Yeah. Well, I agree. The advertising and the dressing, the colors, the clothing. Oh, definitely. push in that direction of being more feminized. But just off the subject real quick here, we have a new school opening out here in the Orlando area. It's the Sally Ride Elementary School. Of course, yes. Sally Ride being an astronaut, yep. Her great contributions of being an astronaut in the space program. It was interesting because before I started reading the article itself talking about the new school that just opened up, I said to myself, I wonder if they're going to mention a certain part of her background, her history, her sexual background. And I was right. Before the article ended, it had to throw in there, of course, with pressure from the LGBTQ plus, whatever, transgenderism, had to mention that she had a partner who agreed and was very pleased with the new school opening up, her partner of 27 years. I knew they were going to have to throw that in because they just flat out are advertising this agenda of, homosexuality. They're just pushing it very, very hard. In TV, media, everything they can, they seem to take that opportunity to push that agenda.
Yeah, they do. And on the other hand, I can understand where the thinking behind that is that the LGBT community needs their own heroes. And sometimes that can backfire because there was this group a while back that was outing Hollywood stars who were gay under the excuse, we have to have our heroes and celebrities too. But it did destroy a lot of careers. Tom Selleck was a good example. And what they did to him was absolutely unforgivable. They did it without his permission. And, he had this great career. He did Magnum P.I. here in Hawaii. He did Quigley Down Under, which is still one of my favorite movies. And that was basically it. All of a sudden, he lost his bankability. And I understand wanting to have your heroes, but destroying somebody's life, destroying your hero's life in the process, seems to be counterproductive.
Yeah, I agree. That's it for me, Mike. Appreciate it. Great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over here to Kevin in West Virginia. Kevin, thank you for waiting. And what is on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I've been a lot of thinking into this and a lot of thinking with the censorship. They wouldn't be censoring the crap out of everybody if they weren't getting ready to do something. And I don't know if that something is a false flag event on the media, possibly even on the detention centers down around the border that has the kids and everything in there, possibly even school shootings. And I'm trying to tie this all into last week's article with the terror training camp. I think that was in New Mexico, the guy that took up with, or has somehow tied into the 93 Oklahoma City bombing.
Yes.
I think they're gearing up.
No, I think it was tied into 9/11.
Oh, okay. But I just still think they're gearing up for whenever event to happen to silence us so we can't ask the questions that need to be asked.
Well, I think a big part of why independent media is being silenced right now is ahead of the midterm elections, because the Democrats are very much aware. They had the corporate media in their pocket in 2016, and they still couldn't control the narrative. And I think that's a big reason about what's going on. But like I said, there's a lot of different groups, a lot of different agendas who want the independent media silenced. There's the vaccine manufacturers, there's the GMO people, there's the war machine, and all of them working together. They all want the independent media to go away so they can go back to basically spoon-feeding the American people whatever propaganda suits their agenda on any particular day.
I agree with you. I totally agree that, the midterm elections is a huge part of this. I just still think they're gearing up. I just feel it. I just feel there's an event coming down the horizon, and it's going to be bloody. And I also think during this event, they're going to try to do a violent overthrow of Trump.
Could very well be. It could very well be. They could even be thinking about assassinating him because they haven't been able to get him out with the Mueller investigation. And if the Democrats do not take control of the House of Representatives in November, then impeachment will be off the table. And I'm sure they have to realize that if Trump is assassinated, the independent media is going to be all over that story, looking for every possible flaw in the official version of that event.
That's why we got to be censored.
Yep.
See what I'm saying?
Well,
that's
I
all
don't
I
think
have.
we got to be censored, but they certainly do.
No, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's why they want us censored, so we don't jump all over it. And the other thing, the West Virginia 6 Supreme Court justices, or whatever they are, were they impeached today? Were there trials today?
I don't know if it's actually started yet, but apparently it is moving forward.
Okay. I'm not going to say anything more about that. I still think there's some underlying crimes that's not being put out in the media, and I think it's pedophilia crimes. I think that's being covered up here in West Virginia. I'm not saying that's what's going on, but I do suspect that's what's going on. But that's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call here. And as far as the state Supreme Court judges in West Virginia, what I've read so far basically is saying that there was this very casual climate of corruption that's just permeated the entire system. One of the judges already stepped down from the bench, and the rest are about to be impeached. And apparently it was just a major problem, and they couldn't ignore it any longer. So we'll see what happens over there. But it's another reminder that when a government starts to go bad, it goes all the way bad. And that's exactly what's happened here. All right, let's take another phone call from John in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I would like to talk about the last caller, about him thinking about there's going to be an event, to your other last caller about the whole gender bending thing. And then it ties in first with the gender bender, then with the censorship of the media. Have you heard of the 1840s book by Whitman, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass? Have you heard of that book?
No, I haven't.
It came out in 1840, and it came out in 1840, and he was talking about these topics of slavery and interracial, also gay and everything. He was talking. It was a big book. Well, not a big book, but it produced a lot of thinking, and a lot of people were mad. They wanted to censor from both sides, North and South.
Yes.
And it was the prequel to what happened later, the Civil War, which cost over 1 million American lives. And you could tie that in with today, with why they want to censor the media and why the war is strictly on the SAW. Because the SAWs, the social justice warriors, completely do not like what they see in Palestine. They don't necessarily care about, the whole land thing. They just don't like seeing little kids being shot from 700 yards away. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
You can't. There's no way you could justify that. There's no way you could spin it and say that that was good. And any moral person who looks at that would be like, that is very bad. You have to use real guns because the bullets of your rubber guns wouldn't even reach, and some of your regular guns. That's why you see this push, because remember, Trump said America will fight for Israel, not 100%, but 1,000%. And this is specifically why, because our left in America, remember, America is the only country that has this. Every other, look at Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, Iran. We're the only ones who are able to speak our mind, and not unless not if you're in a high place, but if you're an average citizen, you could say whatever you want out in the streets, and no police is going to come behind you and shoot you in the back of the head for speaking your opinion. You know what I'm saying?
Well, we're starting to lose that as well, because Israel is pushing, for an Israel exception to the First Amendment. They're trying to get, for example, questioning the Holocaust criminalized in this country. Yeah. So we're starting to get into this situation where, in point of fact, you can't stand on a street corner and say anything that you want to say without, repercussion. Because if you get on a street corner and say, I'm not sure I trust the official story of the Holocaust, they're working to get you arrested for that. We're sliding into tyranny. There's no question about that.
Exactly. That's why the right and left got to unite under a key goal. Because remember, the religious right love Israel, and in the same breath they say the Lord Jesus. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But at the same time, Israel has free health care for its people. The settlements homes are free for any Jew who wants to go live there. All bills paid. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
And at the same time, they turn around and tell Americans, you can't have the stuff paid for by your own tax money because that needs to go over there and pay for Iron Dome, pay for a wall, pay for more households. Not only, they also get an AR-15. Each male settler gets an AR-15 for free because it's considered a dangerous settlement.
Yeah.
So you see this bizarro bill of just why they want to censor the media and why they hate people who talk about maybe we should spend money on the American people because our infrastructure, because that's another thing about America. We're the only country where even in the smallest village in America, you have running water, electricity, and you can get all the entertainment you want. If you know what I mean?
Yes.
If you have the money. In other countries, like in Mexico, there's little villages that don't have running water. There's little places that don't have electricity. That's why the cartels run that place. That's why it's so easy for the cartels to run that place. Because we're the only country that is able to have this. I mean, I was reading somewhere, if China wanted to get to the capacity where we are, where every China person has copper pipes and electric wiring, it would make all the copper in the world extinct. There wouldn't be enough copper in the world for that to happen.
Well, we're already there, and a lot of homes in the United States don't have copper plumbing anymore. They're switching to various plastics, which of course don't last as long, and there's leachate problems. I remember when I was a kid, you'd go into a hardware store and you'd see racks and racks of copper piping. You go into a hardware store today, and some of it is steel, but most of it is some variation on plastic.
It's because all that's being sucked over there. Watch Israel in the next 10 years be what the United States used to be and try to say, we're the land of freedom and opportunity. Come here. That's why you see them backing the white supremacist movement. At the same time, they're backing the migrant crisis. Because like in 1940s, Germany, if you understand that the Jews were immigrants from Russia. But they used the SS to scare the living daylights out of the educated ones to all move. And that's what they're going to do.
All right, well, listen, John, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Boy, we got a lot of people waiting on the phones. So let's start with Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Fine.
I hate when people do that. I shouldn't ask that. I always try not to. I hate when people do that. It seems like your couple of previous callers already stole my thunder. Apparently, everybody's been listening to other call-in shows, too, and we have this, the field is rife with speculation of what the event is going to be coming with all this deplatforming of people. And they already hit the nail on the head with what I was going to say. I think if you look at the time frame, if they can get a lot of this deplatforming done and silencing of people, then they can steal the November elections with vote fraud. And, there won't be as many people available to squawk about the injustices and the methods used and stuff like that, whether it's electronic voting machines or flooding the rolls with dead people and immigrants or whatever. So if they steal the November elections, then they can whip up a bunch of hype and maybe try to foment their own impeachment movement or something like that. So I'm guessing that it's not, like that they're going to stage some kind of 9/11 or something, but that seems to me like if you're silencing the voice, they would be silencing the voices of those who would object to what goes on in the elections in November.
Yeah, I think that's really the primary reason why it's happening right now, and I don't know that it signals any other event. I know a lot of people are concerned that might be the case, but I really do think this is about silencing all conservative points of view heading into the November elections, and it's politicking, it's electioneering. by corporations, and I think somebody needs to look at, a potential lawsuit here. Corp Page telling people to basically go ahead and post these articles on Facebook and Twitter and wherever themselves, rather than InfoWars doing it. Because what's Facebook going to do? Shut down all of the InfoWars readers? That's a violation of free speech.
Well,
that's a class action lawsuit.
Right, and thus far the ISPs have not jumped onto this train. Now, if they did, now you're talking about the need to nationalize the ISPs and make them into public utilities. It's a little hard. It's going to be a little harder to make a service, service provider, an app provider like Facebook or Twitter or something. But I mean, certainly the ISPs involve all the public telecommunications infrastructure, and if they tried to do this, then it would seem like there should be an outcry to nationalize them as public utilities.
I agree, and I'm already hearing people saying that, first of all, Facebook and YouTube and Google represent a trust, and they ought to be broken up or turned into a public utility. They should be handled as a public utility, and the FCC did us all a disservice when it classified these social media companies in such a way that they were allowed to basically filter people, but I think that was done intentionally. Anyway, Glenn, got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We got a lot of callers waiting on the line. And let's see, we're going to go with, I've kind of lost my place here. I think we already did Glenn in Philadelphia, so let's go with Laura in Michigan. Oh, yeah, Laura in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I was hoping when Steve Elkins called in, he talked about his show. We got Agenda 21 literature on, and about talking about the California fires.
Yes.
And he was talking about the fact that, like, within an hour, 45 homes were burning in different places. Upon investigation, the houses that burned had the smart meters. The ones without the smart meters did not burn. So speculated maybe they detonated those meters. So I just wanted to warn people. I opted out myself. I pay extra, $10 a month extra not to have a smart meter. But I think it's worth it. I just really want to warn people. Get rid of those smart meters.
There have been issues with these smart meters just, catching on fire. And, and of course, any electrical fire at all is a very, very dangerous thing. But I don't think that's the reason for the huge fires across all of California, it's now Northern and Southern California. For one thing, they've arrested at least 2 arsonists. So there are some crazies running around with matches and cigarette lighters. But they're trying to blame it all on global warming. But the real issue is the fact that because of the tightening economy, local communities have had to cut back on their fire preparedness. They've had to cut back on keeping the fire breaks open or getting rid of some of the buildup of dead brush. And you can't do that for a while without there eventually being a major fire that's difficult to control. And so it's basically an artifact of our country is spending itself into bankruptcy on the wars, and they're not able to take care of this country.
Well, I just wanted to suggest to everybody to go to Off the Beaten Path Sunday and the archives and hear this man talk on Steve Elkins' show. It was really shocking.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for the advice here. And we're going to switch over to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both, young man.
Aloha.
Hey. There's a couple thoughts for you in listening to Layla's commentary and Steve's commentary with you and so forth. And quite frankly, I know you're going to find this being difference of apples to oranges or whatever as far as the train of thought goes. But you know something? Whenever someone goes through changes, whether it be cosmetic or chemical, depending on what context it is, I'm noting a bit of, in light of the commentary I heard, a little bit of hypocrisy. The reason I say that is because regardless of whether, as I said, it be chemical composition or cosmetic, depending on the circumstances, noting a difference about how someone looks can really vary, and depending on whether or not the person's running for a political scene or a private scene. It's only a personal scenario. I'm finding that to be very, gosh, how do I put this politely? Disingenuous, in a manner of speaking, because it's, you know, some people can view it as a personal attack, some people don't. But if you're going to talk about someone because of their looks, and it's viewed as a personal attack, that's one thing. But if you talk about someone because they look masculine, like butchy, or feminine, or whatever have you, well, that's the same blooming thing. I don't know the difference to actions. I find, you know, if you want to do that for yourself, that's fine. But making it to another person, depending on the context, you know, it's, to me, it's rather distasteful. And well, I could go further, but I'll leave it at that. So you can have your disagreement about that. That's fine. No problem. No issue. But I just thought I would note that to you of what my thoughts were hearing the discussion about how one is viewed okay and one is not.
Well,
so, anyway,
you're right. It is apples and oranges here, because in the context of looking at somebody and analyzing their appearance in terms of masculinity or femininity, as one example, that is merely an observation. It's not an attack. What I think is objectionable is when somebody talks about somebody's appearance in a way that is intended to attack them, to diminish them, to basically dismiss them without addressing what it is they're actually saying. And I think that's one of the reasons why the liberals use this tactic so much. They really don't have anything to bring to the roundtable of ideas anymore. So it's winning through intimidation and insults, and in the case of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, winning through violence, because they don't really have an argument. They have nothing that the American people want anymore. They've gone so hard left that Americans just aren't interested in what they're selling.
Well, Michael, now you're laying on several different layers of various different categories onto one simple action that's purely obviously a political scenario for that matter, that's out there in the public view for that matter. And so I don't view that as a personal attack. I view it as you said, an observation, although you don't view it as an observation of someone's comments for that matter. And so it would be the same difference if I were to tell my next door neighbor that, you know, that gal over there, she has the worst eyeshadow I have ever seen. Yet she thinks that your hairdo is fantastic. So the question is, who's being the observant one, and who's the one making personal attacks? And who's being hypocritical?
Well,
I know that's a lousy analogy.
I think you're in a gray area here. And for one thing, you're talking about a private conversation as opposed to somebody going onto Twitter, you know, and saying this person, you know, wears so much makeup they look like a clown. Again, that's the sign that they don't really have a real genuine idea to share. Again, it's a gray area. It's a bit of a continuum, and everyone's going to have to make their own judgment call. But in general, I think comments about somebody's appearance in a negative, hurtful way to distract from actually discussing the issues at hand, that's not appropriate dialogue in this day and age, in my opinion.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it was even a gray area for that matter, so I have to applaud you on that thought, at least. And with that, I'm out of here. Later.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I'd rather take my chances drinking the water in a small village in Mexico from a well than drinking the running water of Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, it's getting really bad out there, and of course, you know, the private bottled water companies, they think it's just the greatest thing in the world that we can't trust our tap water anymore because they're raking in the dough. I mean, you go to your supermarket, there's always that little cooler with a glass door right next to the checkout stand, and it's full of bottles of water. We never had that when I was a kid. You know, the first time I saw bottled water, it was sparkling water like Perrier, things that you couldn't get out of the faucet. Now, what they're selling in these bottles is basically it's tap water. It's filtered, it's processed a little bit to try and clean it up, but it is for the most part tap water, which means it has the same pharmaceutical contaminants as the water coming out of your faucet, because the processing that they do in these bottled water plants can't remove the pharmaceuticals. The only way you can do that is if you steam distill the water first and then basically add back in certain minerals for flavor and taste. And I don't think they do that because it's too expensive.
Wasn't Sante taken out of the Hudson River, I believe, not coming from the Poland Spring Mountains, is it?
You know, there's a lot of these bottled waters that have labels that suggest they come from all kinds of exotic places, and they imply that, you know, it's a mountain stream or something like that. And then it turns on out, no, they just plug into the city water supply, or they dig into the same aquifers as the city water supply and pump the stuff out, and they do filter it, then they put it in that bottle, and they just sell it at a huge, huge, huge markup.
Oh, Nestle, right there, right?
Yep.
Mike, you had a caller last Thursday. I have to disagree with him about, he said he was for the tariffs on China, but he doesn't understand, like, Trump's putting tariffs on everybody.
Yeah, or sanctions.
I mean, this is, yeah, you know, Mike, there's a company in, I think it's in South Carolina. You ever heard of Element? They make the TVs there in Walmart and Target.
Yes.
Well, they're laying off 100 people because China has the tariffs now on the components. People don't understand. The components are made in China. The parts are going in here in the USA. They got to lay off now 100 people. So if Trump is making, like, say, 100 or 500 jobs, we'll be losing thousands and thousands of jobs. So that's going to hurt the economy because people ain't going to be able to buy those. You know, like, because we keep hearing, oh, well, the steel and the aluminum industry, you know, that's all I hear is aluminum and steel. That's it. But how are those people going to buy anything made of aluminum and steel when they get laid off at Element?
That's exactly,
you know what I mean?
Right. That's exactly right.
And, you know, because now, like, today, the stock market was down 130 again. You know, I mean, you know, and a lot of people don't know this either, but Turkey, they own a lot of they owe euros, especially I think Spain, right?
Yes.
So I mean, this is like they keep saying it's a contagion. It could spread.
Yes.
But there was no reason for this, like this whole thing. You know, Mike, it seems like, you know what it's coming down to? We're at the bottom. Like, we're at the bottom now. I mean, we're basically must be in really bad shape that they have to do this now to the world. You know what I mean? Like, they must really know we're in bad shape. Not you know, not what they say, but on their, you know, on their internal documents, in order to pull all these stunts all of a sudden, you know, because I don't see any way out of this now. You know, Turkey's not going to. Erdogan's like Trump. He ain't going to back down.
No, he's not. And like I said, the fact that the U.S. failed to remove Bashar al-Assad in Syria has shown the world that our military is not invincible. We are a paper tiger. And as a result, other countries are now more willing to basically resist U.S. hegemonic domination. And that's why we've got the U.S. ambassadors traveling all over Europe, you know, threatening all these countries, you back us on Iran or bad things will happen. and he's basically getting a cold reception everywhere he goes.
Yeah, we're just hurting all the people, like here and around the world, for nothing. You know, this could have been done. They could have done this such differently. You know, we keep choosing like the wrong path. You know, like when you have two paths, we keep making the mistake path. I mean, I don't understand. Like, you know, I'm not like an expert in this, but it's just common sense. Why would you put all these sanctions and tariffs all of a sudden on everybody? I mean, it's just flinging stuff out, you know, all at once, and whatever it hits, you know, like the mud, throwing out a big pile of mud, and whoever it hits, oh well. I mean, this ain't going to end good, Mike. I tell you that.
It isn't. And what's happening here right now, and you mentioned it earlier in your call, China makes things that the United States cannot. And it's going to take a while for our factories to get built and come up to the level of manufacturing we had 30 years ago. And so whether they want to or not, people are still buying products that are either made in China or whose internal components are made in China. The tariffs will be applied, and that cost will be passed along as part of the price of the product in question. And so we, the American people, are ultimately paying for all of these tariffs. And as I've said before on the show, all that these tariffs and sanctions are doing is isolating the United States politically and economically from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I really don't think we'll be reaching the point where we're going to be able to have this manufacturer back here. I think it'll be all done and over with by then. Well, you know that.
Yeah.
At this point. Yeah. All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And our phone lines are now clear. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And we're going to get on back to news. Now, as you know, there was this horrible incident in Yemen where the Saudi-led coalition bombed a school bus in the middle of a marketplace, killing 51 children, plus a lot of people in that marketplace. And we're talking civilians. We're talking non-combatants. And everybody's still saying, you know, where'd the bomb come? Who's providing the weapons? And the U.S. is saying, we don't know, we don't know. But photos have now been released by a prominent Yemeni journalist of the remains of the bomb that was used. And it is very clearly a Mark 82 bomb built by Lockheed Martin. So it was a U.S. supplied weapon that destroyed that school bus. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Madam Mayhem in South Dakota, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. My question is relating to freedom of speech and anti-Semitism. I sent you that email about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and they've got the 10-point definition of anti-Semitism. Basically, while we're kind of distracted with wanting an Internet Bill of Rights and worried about freedom of speech, platforms shutting down and such, the YouTube resource that I was listening to about that had mentioned that various top Internet platforms are integrating that anti-Semitism definition into their terms of service. And so I'm wondering, if you understand my question, do you think that in the hypothetical Bill of Rights for Internet, can we be subjected to the same requirements of that anti-Semitism definition? Because it's kind of a big deal. And overseas, Corbyn, he disagreed with half a sentence of one of the 10 points, and they just raised a huge fuss over him, you know, Nazi this and anti-Semitic that and all that. So I'm kind of curious what your feelings are on that.
Well, Israel's goal on this whole thing is to redefine anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism means basically a hatred of Semitic people, which includes Arabs as well as Jews, just because they are Semitic. And Israel wants to
That's
change.
according to normal people, but their written definition goes way beyond that unreasonably.
I know. And what Israel wants to do is redefine anti-Semitism to include criticism of the actions of Israel's government. To say that anybody who's criticizing the actions of Israel's government is basically expressing hatred of the Jewish people, which is utter nonsense. That's like saying that the only reason people ever complained about the Nazis was they hate the German people. And it's absolutely absurd, but Israel has been pushing for this, and they're getting it basically adopted in a lot of universities. As you said, it's now being adopted by the various corporate social media. And it's an absolutely ridiculous changing of the definition. But that's what Israel wants. And Israel is working toward having an Israeli exemption to the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And if they get it, then there'll be a vaccine exemption to freedom of speech, a GMO exemption, and so forth and so on. Anyway,
Can you hold me over?
Yeah, I'll hold you over. Stay on the line. We'll be right back.
Okay, thanks.
And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're talking with Madam Mayhem in South Dakota, and you had something more to share with us.
Yep, I was just going to point out, like, I followed everything you were saying. My concern is, just as with our Bill of Rights, there seems to be, they're trying to distort freedom of speech to include things it never had before, such as hate speech. And that's what concerns me with, if we push toward an Internet Bill of Rights by our government to implement that, our government who supports Israel and all of their, their conditions of friendship, then is it possible that we could be marching ourselves into a gulag? Because what people may not know is that the anti-Semitic definition is pushing to include, I'll leave you. Yep, I'll let you respond to that, and I'll get off your phone line, but thanks a lot.
All right, well, thank you very much here. Yeah, it's a very dangerous situation. Now, the problem with a Bill of Rights, whether it's a patient Bill of Rights or an Internet Bill of Rights, it doesn't carry the force of law. It's largely symbolic. And basically what we need to do is go back and say, there is a Bill of Rights that is supposed to be the foundation of this country. And we have seen that Bill of Rights under attack. Certainly the Fourth Amendment is pretty much gone at this point. Most of the Fifth Amendment is not gone, especially that part about not using private property without just compensation. The Second Amendment has been under constant attack for a long time. The government totally ignores the 10th Amendment. And now they're coming for the First Amendment, freedom of speech. And they're hiding behind corporations saying, well, these are private companies, so they're not bound by the Bill of Rights. But in my opinion, they ought to be, because they're operating here in the United States of America. Unfortunately, the government itself is one of those parties who want the independent media to go away because we've taken away their ability to lie to the American people with impunity. And like I said, there's a lot of overlapping groups here. And I think the proximity of the November elections is why it's happening now. But we know that various corporations and vested interests have been trying to find ways to silence or ridicule the independent media ever since we got started, all those years ago, because we are a threat to their ability to rule the country, because they rule with lies, fraud, and deception. In fact, they've been ruling with lies for so long, they don't know any other way to govern. And they don't want to go back to the old original United States, where we, the people, had honest elections and could pick our own rulers. And, the independent media over the last several years, we've exposed a lot of really nasty stuff. And as a result, trust in the corporate media is at an all-time record low. Trust in the government itself is at an all-time record low. Public opinion of Congress as a whole is at an all-time low. And it's not because we in the independent media have done anything wrong, other than to expose what the people in government have actually been doing behind their wall of propaganda to convince us that they're really a bunch of swell Joes. The government has done this to themselves. They have a credibility crisis of their own making. And we should not feel sorry for them because they broke the rules. They went outside the limits of the Constitution. And by doing so, they rendered themselves illegitimate. So this is a fight, and we don't know what's going to happen. At some point, I think there's going to have to be a lawsuit challenging the political bias of these social media corporations, because there is bias. There's clear, demonstrable bias against conservatives, and it's probably going to go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And like I said, one thing that websites like InfoWars should do is just have a banner on their webpage saying, take these articles and please, on our behalf, post them to Twitter and Facebook. Because if Twitter and Facebook start banning everybody who reads InfoWars, then we're talking class action lawsuit for the suppression of freedom of speech. The First Amendment, in addition to freedom of speech, gives us the right, it doesn't give us the right, it recognizes and guarantees the right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. And the internet is the new version of the town square. It's nationwide, but the same principle does apply. We have a right to peacefully assemble and have discussions amongst ourselves about what is going on in the world and in our government. And these corporations are trying to suppress that. That's the First Amendment violation. Anyway, we've got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Turning to the domestic politics here. Peter Strzok has now been fired by the FBI over his text messages with former lover Lisa Page. During the run-up to the 2016 presidential election, especially the ones that basically talked about how they were going to prevent Trump's election. And, of course, don't feel too sorry for him. He still works for the CIA. But I think the FBI did it more about trying to repolish their image after all that's gone down than the fact that Peter Strzok basically didn't maintain his objectivity and neutrality, which is supposedly required of FBI agents doing their job. Okay, Trump is now demanding Mueller end the Russia probe, and at the same time, he's demanding the investigation into Hillary's email server be reopened. And after a year and a half, more than a year and a half, Mueller's found nothing. I mean, he's going after Manafort. The prosecution rested today. Now the defense gets their turn at bat, as it were. It has nothing to do with Trump-Russia collusion, which is exactly what Mueller was supposed to be looking into. And he's found nothing. And it's been 18 months and who knows how many millions of dollars. And it is time to shut it down because it is politically motivated. But we know that Mueller is going to drag this out through the November elections so the Democrats can campaign on it. You know, the president is under investigation. Anybody can be under investigation. Doesn't mean anything actually happened. If there had been any evidence that Trump had colluded with Russia, we would have seen it by now. It would have leaked out. Mueller's investigation is like a colander. It's just full of holes. It's leaking like a sieve. How do we know this? Well, look at how much has leaked out about Hillary's Russia collusion, for which there is a great deal of evidence that it actually did happen. Now, Nancy Pelosi is out there whining that the corporate media is behind an effort to see that she does not regain the House speakership. Apparently, she's absolutely convinced the Democrats are going to win the House, and she's already angling to be, regain the speakership. But there are a lot of Democrats who are out there saying it's time for some new blood. And Nancy Pelosi is out there blaming the media for that trend. I'm surprised she's not blaming the Russians for it here. Meanwhile, over at the Washington Compost, Paul Waldman, who's an opinion writer for the Post, published a column last week in which he said Republicans are attacking Nancy Pelosi only because she's a woman. So they're playing the gender card again here. I think people are just getting sick and tired of all the whining. You know, women are oppressed, blacks are oppressed, illegal immigrants are oppressed. We've heard it way too many times. They've gone back to that, well, too many times. Okay, now, Omarosa Oni Manigault Newman was previously a contestant on Trump's show, you know, The Apprentice. And then she got hired as an advisor into the White House. Then she got fired. And so now she's gone public claiming that when she was on Celebrity Apprentice, she heard an audio recording of Trump using the N-word. And she's made other allegations of appalling language, very un-PC. And when a reporter asked Trump if he feels betrayed by Omarosa's recent statements, he called Omarosa a lowlife. And basically, Omarosa has now come out saying that she recorded her firing in the Situation Room. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. One, the Situation Room is a no devices allowed area. You're not allowed to take your own cell phone or any other electronics in there because of the high security and classification of what is being discussed in there. But she did, and she could actually be prosecuted for it. But she's out there just making a lot of noise. And it probably a combination of payback for being fired from the White House. And also you need to understand she's got a book coming out about her time at the White House. And so she wants as much publicity as she can get right now to boost the book sales. Although I would not be inclined to actually buy it. Now, British journalist Piers Morgan said that Omarosa literally offered to sleep with him in order to win the season of the Celebrity Apprentice on which they both appeared. And he wrote an op-ed for the Daily Mail questioning why a relentlessly loathsome person such as Omarosa was even offered a job in the administration. And he really unloaded on her in what I would consider to be a less than professional description. But Trump has tweeted on out, Omarosa fired for the last time, never made it, never will. And basically saying that no one believes her. And she may be destroying any chances of any future high-level employment. But then Omarosa may be basically betting that her book is going to be a runaway bestseller and she can retire wealthy. Okay, Rudy Giuliani is out there teasing this will be a big week in the Mueller investigation. He was on Fox and Friends and he dropped that line, didn't clarify what it was, but given that Giuliani is acting as Trump's attorney in this matter, it sounds like he thinks that something is going to happen to discredit the whole Mueller operation. So we'll wait and see what happens with there. Meanwhile, Judicial Watch, as you know, last week obtained documents from the IRS regarding the targeting of conservative groups, nonprofits, during the Obama administration. And basically, they announced today that McCain's Minority Staff Director, Henry Kimmer, wrote IRS official Lois Lerner and other IRS officials urging audits. And so many audits that it would financially destroy these nonprofit organizations. So now we know why Lois Lerner destroyed her hard drive. The dog ate my hard drive was the excuse, I think, if I remember that correctly. But yeah, it was deliberate. It was deliberate. Conservative nonprofits were being targeted under Obama. Now, politics is a dirty business, but in recent years, it has really gone down there into the mud. And it's an embarrassment to ordinary Americans to see their government acting like this here. Now, a lot of people are making a big deal over the fact that there have been 2 flights now of a large aircraft from Washington, D.C. Down to the Clintons' hometown in Arkansas. And in Arkansas, the planes are being loaded up with boxes and boxes and boxes of documents and then flown back to Washington, D.C. And everybody's getting excited saying, oh, this must be evidence related to the Clinton corruption, to the Clinton Foundation, and there's a lot of documents there. Well, I refuse to get excited because of all the times we have seen the Clintons close to being prosecuted and then something happens. Comey lets her off, gives her a get-out-of-jail-free card. So does Loretta Lynch. For all we know, those documents are being taken to Washington, D.C. to bury them. And I refuse to get excited about a prosecution for the Clintons until somebody actually snaps those handcuffs on either one of them. Because they are untouchables. Look at all the stuff they've gotten away with over the years, going all the way back, even before the murder of Vince Foster. All the way back to Arkansas and the gun and the drug running. They're untouchable. They know where all the dead bodies are buried, and more importantly, how they got to be dead bodies, and they have enough blackmail power to basically make sure they never go to jail, as James Comey proved with that ridiculous press conference over the email server. Now, a couple of stories coming out of the corporate media. Apparently, ABC staged a fake experiment to basically create a segment showing that Democrats support free speech and Republicans do not. This came out of ABC's What Would You Do on Friday night. And apparently they went to a small Republican township in New Jersey to try and portray Republicans as enemies of free speech and Democrats as its defenders, which is kind of ridiculous when you see how many Democrats are supporting the deplatforming of all conservative websites out there. Now, Democrat Senator Mark Warner is literally proposing the end of free speech. And he's citing Russian hacking. And so he's pushing a proposal for a complete government takeover of the internet and social media. And they want to adopt the EU approach to silence political criticism. They claim it is necessary to prevent Russian hackers and restore the people's trust in our institutions, democracy, and the free press. Well, I don't know about you. I'm smelling a lot of fear coming out of Washington, D.C. and the corporate media. I think it finally sunk in that the American people really have lost trust and confidence in the institutions of government because of how the institutions are behaving. They want to go on being corrupt. They just don't want anybody to have the right to talk about it. And again, if the government takes over the internet, then the Bill of Rights applies. And so would the First Amendment. Now, they won't act like that because they have to stop those Russian hackers, those troublemakers, those online troublemakers. We've got to stop them. But somebody's going to have to file a lawsuit saying that freedom of speech means freedom of all speech, including that you don't want to hear. And it'll probably go all the way to the Supreme Court, which, given that Trump is taking the Supreme Court in a conservative direction, the timing's actually going to be pretty good. If it was still a liberal Supreme Court, I have no doubt they would immediately say, oh yes, there have to be exceptions to freedom of speech. We can't allow Russian hackers and outside actors. We've got to keep the speech, we've got to silence dissent here. People are starting to not trust the government. And again, it's not because of what anybody in the independent media did. It's because of the government's own actions. They lied to us about Saddam's nuclear weapons. They lied to us about Assad's sarin gas. They lied to us about the Lusitania, the USS Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Why should we have any trust and confidence in a government that tells lies that big and that damaging? Because in every one of those cases, those lies were used to trick this nation into war. And a lot of people were killed and crippled in those wars. So why should you have trust and confidence in a government that does things like this? Now, as you know, it's primary season. We had our primaries here in Hawaii yesterday, and apparently Tulsi Gabbard won the primary, so we'll see what happens come November. But we do have a problem, a voting problem, and we've been reporting on it the last week. We were reporting last Friday, I think it was, on how some of the registered voters seem to have incredible ages, going up to 200 years, which means their registrations have been used over and over and over again for decades, keeping them active, used for fraud. And according to U.S. Census data, the United States has 3.5 million more registered voters than live adults. That's how bad the problem is. And those 3.5 million registered voters, additional registered voters, are obviously intended to be used for election fraud. And that's a lot of votes that can be used to swing elections. And of course, that's that story that in northeastern Georgia, back in May, twice as many ballots as the number of registered voters were cast. It's just wide open season. Now, I don't know why the Republicans aren't getting on top of this here, because as you know, a judge has rescinded the consent decree, and that actually happened much earlier in the year. And the Republican National Committee should have immediately put together a dedicated team to look at election fraud, to challenge questionable elections. And maybe they are, and maybe they're doing it, but the corporate media is not reporting it, because the corporate media is a big part of the election fraud system. Because that central tabulation company, Voters News Service, or whatever they're calling themselves this time around, is owned by the TV networks and 2 major newspapers. Most people are very surprised to find out that there is no government agency that counts the election totals, and there's no civilian or government oversight. It's all in the hands of a corporation. Now, as you know, over the weekend, Antifa was rioting in several cities for the 1-year anniversary of Charlottesville, and they got very violent. They were out there in their masks and doing things. They still don't want to be photographed. They were covering camera lenses and cutting cords to TV cameras. Apparently, one of the Antifa people shouted down a USA Today reporter, saying, "You don't even know who the blank we are." Sure we do. You're the fascists. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the Antifa riots over the weekend. And NBC, interestingly enough, had one of their reporters and crew assaulted by Antifa in Charlottesville, and decided they weren't going to run the story because they're trying to portray Antifa in a positive light, as being the anti-fascist and standing up, against the Trump supporters, who are all presumably bad people. And I imagine that reporter may be thinking about changing networks at some point here. Now, Antifa activists were there counter-protesting the Unite the Right to rally across from the White House. And one of them on camera basically threatened to kill President Trump, saying, I would murder him, do him just like Gaddafi. Now, when you get that obvious about it, it's going to get noticed. And as a matter of fact, the Secret Service is launching an investigation into Antifa threats to murder Donald Trump. That is absolutely inappropriate to say and think. And by the way, it is illegal. There's actually specifically a crime that if you merely threaten the life of the president, that can get you tossed in prison. It's very, very serious business. And again, this kind of rhetoric sends a signal. Antifa does not really have any platform other than screaming, we're opposed to fascists, and all the white people and all the conservatives are the fascists, which is odd because it's Antifa that is engaging in fascistic-like tactics here. And apparently another article with photos shows Antifa calling for the removal of Trump and the complete overthrow of the U.S. government. And I think that has crossed a line. And I think because Antifa is associated with the Democratic Party, that's going to really affect a lot of voters come November. And maybe the Democrats don't care. They've got legions of illegal immigrants all set to vote. We already know there's massive election fraud taking place, so maybe they don't really care here. One of the signs out there in front of Washington, the White House, was openly calling for people to be shot. You know, if you disagree with Antifa, Antifa wants to shoot you. And they have crossed the line. Even Vox can't defend them any longer. And Vox was actually reporting, saying that Antifa says it fights fascists and neo-Nazis, but this weekend, members attacked cops and journalists. So they did cross a line. They're out of control. They really, really are here. Now, needless to say, this is the 1-year anniversary of Charlottesville, and U.S. politicians couldn't resist the opportunity to claim that what happened in Charlottesville a year ago was somehow Russia's fault. Ooh, Russia did this. Representative Tom Garrett, the U.S. lawmaker from the Republican Party, told CNN that had to do with Russian interference, fomenting the flames of what happened in Charlottesville. We'll be right back with hour number 3. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, hour number 3. And we're going to take a phone call from Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. James Corbett cited a survey that said only 9% of the Americans are in favor of war with Iran. Yep. And 37% are dead set against it. And with that in mind, he was mentioning, I agree with him, that it sets us up for a false flag, possibly in the Straits of Hormuz, to try to change the attitude of Americans about going to war with Iran.
Well, that may be another reason why they're trying to shut down the independent media, because every time there's a false flag, we rip it apart.
Well, I would think Americans are should be getting wise to false flags by now, because all the shooter false flags, they didn't amount to any movement to take away all the guns, So hopefully people are getting wise to that stuff. They saw what happened in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction. And I don't think they want to be fooled again.
No. Fool me once, shame on you. And, fool me twice, shame on me.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to mention was... is we were talking to Peter the other day, and he talked about his command and general staff study, and just the west side of the west side of the Straits of Hormuz in there would take 3 divisions And that's the whole active Marine Corps.
Yes.
I mean, there's only 3 divisions on active duty in the Marine Corps, and that's the whole thing. It would take just for that west side of the Straits of Hormuz. So I don't think the generals are going to, permit us going in and doing that. And, I was an aviator in the military, and, I dropped my share of, some Mark 82s. But I would not be opposed to Russia coming in and put S-400s in there. That doesn't sound very good, but my motivation for saying that is it would be a deterrent. It would be deterrent against airstrikes going in and a deterrent against a war in general.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I'm sure that Russia understands that if the wars get going any more momentum, it could spin out of control, and we could have the whole world at war, and inevitably it's going to go nuclear, because I don't think the United States can win a conventional war against Russia and China. And on the day when our government realizes that, that's when they're going to start turning those little brass keys in the silos.
Yeah, and somehow the the neocons think that they're going to be immune from this. I just don't understand that logic.
Well, they've all got their bunkers. I mean, the government has been real good at building all kinds of underground bunkers for themselves and their buddies. They've reactivated the Greenbrier. They've got Mount Weather. They've got that other resort out there where the Supreme Court justices go. And so they think that if it does get out of hand, they're just going to go on down and then come on back up. 6 months later, the world will have a much smaller population, and everything will just be hunky-dory, and they'll just start business up as usual. But it's a pipe dream.
Naive. Yeah, when they come back up, they might get a rude awakening about reality, because nothing's going to be here. I mean, good luck starting it over,
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're going to have all kinds of seeds down there with them, but it is going to take a while. First of all, I can't imagine anybody in government actually knowing how to farm. So,
no, but they're naive enough to think that they'll have somebody else do it. Anyway, that's about all I had, Mike, and I just want to make one little comment about last week. You forgot to ask the guy in Canada if he had any good jokes.
Well,
trying to think of his name.
Yeah, Mateus and
Mateus, right?
Yeah, I've gotten some emails about his jokes, and they're less than flattering. Anyway, listen, Terry, we're going to let you go.
Yeah.
And we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I don't know. A few weeks ago, I didn't actually watch it on Fox, but I've seen it on YouTube, an interview with Tucker Carlson and a former Special Forces colonel who said that he's worried about a false flag to start a war with Iran.
Yes. And
I got to give Carlson credit, because this guy is he's pretty much more independent media than anything else for a mainstream media station like what I call the fake neocon news station of Fox. You know? And I think people need to start listening. I remember one thing I remember when I was in the Army, and I'm sure it's throughout the military, because if you read books like Richard Marchenko, stuff, troops who, the best soldiers do not rise to general. They don't rise to flag rank, whether it's Army or Navy or anything else. They come out as colonels, if they're lucky, in the Army. They come out maybe a captain, like Captain Marchenko in the Navy. And as a matter of fact, he actually went to jail because of some of the things he did expose the Navy's incompetence. So he went to jail for about a year, Marchenko. So what I'm saying is this. These are people we better start listening to.
Yes.
Because Colonel Anthony Paper is another one. The guy who's no longer with us, who warned against the Iraq War, when one of the most decorated soldiers, I forget his name now, he was also a colonel. a lieutenant colonel. We better start listening to these people.
Yes.
And start understanding. We're not going to have a, I saw Trump today. I was at the gym. I saw him on TV talking to the military, waving the sword, how strong we are, how tough we are, and this and that, even though he never served a day in the military himself. Dodged the drafter in Vietnam. But he doesn't understand, he better start getting through his thick head. He has any hopes of becoming a president, not only a second term, but even becoming a well-liked president. All you got to do is get us into a war with Iran, okay? And that's going to go down to drink, and it's going to be bloody. I don't think Russia is going to get involved, actively, because I think
I disagree. I disagree. I disagree because Russia is feeling the encroachment and the encirclement, and I think Putin is going to handle Iran the same way that he handles Syria. Iran is going to ask Russia to come in and render assistance, and Russia will come on in as advisors or whatever. They'll certainly supply a lot of weapons. But Putin, he is a global statesman, and he's been trying to keep the U.S. war agenda under control. He's the one who negotiated that agreement for Syria to give up its chemical weapons, which didn't stop the U.S. from invading anyway. And now Putin is looking at Iran, which signed that nuclear deal and surrendered their highly enriched uranium, and now the U.S. is getting ready to invade them again. So,
but what I'm saying, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, I don't think he's going to actually be massive force. I think he's going to rather be smart. He's going to just sit back and he's going to start arming the Iranians, which he's doing already. They're going to have those S-4, what do you call those S-4 missiles?
S-400.
Give them other weapons.
Well, the S-500 is coming online now, and my guess is that Iran would make a great place to field test those.
Mm-hmm. So what? And on top of that, he's going to probably give them guerrilla soldiers too, help them, probably arm them with Chechen contractors and others. And that's what's going to happen. It's just going to be a bloody mess for the U.S. And it's going to. It could well bring down this government as a whole. It certainly would finish off Trump, and I don't think a Democrat would be able to profit off of it, because the Democrats are, if anything, pushing war more than anybody else these days.
Yes.
So I think it would open. I think it would open the way for a third party, maybe a Cynthia McKinney, maybe even Alex Jones. Who knows? I mean, somebody, maybe Rand Paul or running third party or something like that.
Well, Alex Jones has got the popularity and the numbers. He could run, and if he does, I will support him.
I would too. Absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely.
I don't agree with everything Jones is doing, but I agree with both. I think he's too much of a sycophant for Trump. I think he's got it. But I've heard lately he's starting to question Trump, that Trump's not doing enough about this, silencing of, he says conservative. It's not conservative voices, it's independent voices, because they're also shutting, and Peace Voice, by the way, they're throwing Ron Paul and his people off of a lot of these social media networks. Why? Yes. Because they want the public to be ready for their BS, whether it's going to be by a false flag or whatever else. But what I don't understand, it's not going to work this time. The people who are military age, who are ready to go into the military today, the young people, they don't get their news anymore from a made or corporate media. They get their news from all over the place.
Yes.
They don't buy a lot of this stuff, and that's where they're going to have to get their recruits. And they're not going to get the recruits they need. And if they go to a draft, I said that to you before. If they go to a draft, this country is going to tear itself apart. Plain and simple. It's going to be worse than the Vietnam War.
I agree.
Not going to happen.
I agree.
We're not going to let this happen.
Trump
better get into his thick head.
During Vietnam, there was basically the war. But in the current situation, we have all these wars all over the place. 7 officially acknowledged wars. Iran would be number 8. And the American people are tired of war. We've been at war now longer than we were in World War I and World War II put together. And we're seeing our children come back from the war zones in boxes or in wheelchairs. We're watching all of this money just flowing out of our pockets to feed all this death and destruction, while our country's infrastructure is just rotting away. Okay, I just lost Mark. Oh, there you are.
Going to war for Israel, okay? But
Okay, I don't know if it's...
I think I lost you, man.
No, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, yeah, Twitch is acting twitchy. Yeah, I can hear you now. Twitch has been cutting in and out. I don't know if it's internet problems or what's going on, but apparently our connection's bogging down.
Yeah.
All right, so
maybe
anyway.
the deep state is listening in. They don't like hearing.
All right, well, listen, Mark, I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network right now. Getting on back to local politics here, right here in Hawaii, Democratic State Representative Matt Lopresti was caught stealing his opponent's campaign handout off a person's door. He was caught on the home security video, and he's basically running for the seat vacated by Will Espero, who's running for lieutenant governor. And Matt has already publicly apologized, but we see a lot of this in campaigns. Remember in 2016, the Democrats were just running all over the place, stealing Trump signs left and right. You know, I know politics is dirty. It shouldn't be this dirty. And supposedly, the Federal Elections Commission exists to keep it from being this dirty. Now, over in North Carolina, their ferry system has suspended a boat captain and a crew member for 1 week without pay after they hoisted a flag supporting the re-election of President Donald Trump. And basically, one of the passengers on the ferry took a photo of the Trump 2020 flag flying on the mast, and it went viral. And so the North Carolina Department of Transportation launched an investigation. Now, again, freedom of speech, they have a right to hang the flag, but they do not own that ferry. And they did not have the permission of the ferry's owners to put that flag up there. So, got to be very careful where you put those signs here. All right, let's talk about the economic news here a little bit. Global trade growth is starting to fall off. There's unease in the U.S. dollar funding market, and we're seeing a lot of dangerous messages coming out of the debt market. Apparently, credit card bankruptcies are skyrocketing, and we're headed to a major upset. We don't know where it's going to start, probably the bond market, but it's only a matter of time. They can't put this back together. Despite government propaganda, the reality is that too few Americans are working to keep this economy ticking along. The labor participation rate from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is in 63%. That's 62 to 63% of Americans willing and able to work. And most of those people who are not working are not counted for the unemployment numbers. They're recategorized as chronically unemployable. It's just a way of cooking the books, of making them invisible. But even CNN reported on this fact that we have, almost 100 million Americans out of work. Chronically out of work for months, if not years. Spot cargoes through the winter to avoid potential tariffs amid a trade conflict between the U.S. and China. And under the plan, PetroChina would boost buying of spot cargoes from other countries or swap U.S. shipments with other nations in East Asia to avoid paying additional tariffs. So now America's liquefied natural gas industry is about to get thumped on the head. Now, whether it's due to the tariffs or due to the fact that American consumers simply don't have a lot of money anymore, or a combination of both, July mobile phone shipments from China fell 14% over the same time last year. That's a pretty serious drop, and obviously this is affecting all of the iPhones, rather all of these phones, whether it's Apple or Samsung or Google phone or whatever. If they're made in China, sales are slowing down. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain is arm-twisting Great Britain, saying back the U.S. on the Iran sanctions or face serious consequences for business. In other words, more sanctions on Great Britain. And so U.S. Ambassador Woody Johnson wrote an op-ed in the Sunday Telegraph asking the British government to use its considerable diplomatic power and influence to join the U.S. as a united front in its efforts to secure a genuinely comprehensive agreement on Iran ending its nuclear program. Well, Iran had ended its nuclear program, and we already know that the new Iran deal includes the long-range missiles, because that's what Israel wants. Iran is not going to give those up. They're not going to sit there without some kind of weapon of deterrence to avoid being invaded, because I'm sure they're paying attention to all this rhetoric here in Washington, D.C. about invade Iran, invade Iran, invade Iran. And they were hoping to avoid it. That was a big reason that they went along with this Iran nuclear deal. But they're not going to give up the long-range missiles. They need to have a deterrence, a deterrent. That's what this is really all about. The U.S. wants to strip Iran, as well as every other nation, of any possibility of deterrent to an eventual U.S. invasion. And looking at all the times the U.S. has promised, if you give up your weapons of deterrent, we won't invade, and then they invaded, Iran knows better than to go with that. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to take a phone call from Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Good day. Yeah, Michael, what's on my mind is what's going on in Chicago. They keep talking now. There was 30 shootings over the weekend, this weekend, but they never say what's going on during the weekday from Monday to Thursday. So how many murders are going on in those days? And we're talking about Chicago here. What the insanity is that all the big cities, this is happening in all the cities, but Chicago just happens to be off the charts. But I am from Chicago originally. I was raised there as a young boy. And it used to be a beautiful city. It's still a beautiful city, but unfortunately, South Side is like worse than the gangster areas with Al Capone. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is way worse than what's going on in the Roaring '20s. You got these monsters over there running around. Trump needs to send in the National Guard, Michael. He absolutely needs to send in the National Guard, send a message to the rest of the country, and these Antifa jerks that keep running around. They keep doing their nonsense, what they call the police of Washington. He needs to send the National Guard out and say, well, let's get this straightened out here, because, you know, and it's insanity. And another thing that's really bugging me, you know, Sam Rose is taping Donald Trump in the White House. And what about this Chinese guy that was listening on Fine?
Okay, I'm not able to hear Tom again. I don't know what's going on with Twitch. It works fine with the commercials and the music, but for some reason when it's a phone call... There you are. Are you there?
Hello?
Yeah, you know something, Tom, I'm going to let you go, and we're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the day here, because... there's a technical issue that we need to iron on out. All right, getting on back to the economic news. Iran is basically making its oil and gas economically attractive. And they're promising steep discounts to countries that buy oil and gas from them. mostly to countries in Asia who are already not inclined to go along with the U.S. sanctions. So again, the world just has had enough of Washington, D.C.'s bullying and the sanctions. Germany's economic minister is calling on Europe to defy Trump's Iran sanctions. Minister Peter Altmaier lashed out at the Trump administration in response to Washington's ultimatum to cut all economic ties with Iran following the U.S. pullout of the 2015 brokered Iran nuclear deal. And Altmaier told the Bild newspaper on Saturday, Germany should be assertive and defiant in the face of American sanctions by actually investing more in Iran. He said, we don't let Washington dictate their will on trade relations with other nations. So the world is starting to pull away from the United States. And as I said, the non-victory in Syria is already having geopolitical repercussions. The United States is not seen as invincible any longer. And all these sanctions are doing is isolating the United States politically and economically here. Okay, and as you know, BRICS recently had a summit in Johannesburg, and basically a key takeaway from that is BRICS strongly condemns unilateralism and protectionism, a not very subtle dig at the Trump administration. And their declaration, the Johannesburg Declaration, is unmistakable. We recognize that the multilateral trading system is facing unprecedented challenges. We underscore the importance of an open world economy. Well, they're going to get it. There is no way that the United States is going to drag the entire world back to Bretton Woods, even though that is clearly the objective. Get the world back to being dependent on the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking, off of which the U.S. makes a profit. But the world doesn't want to do that, and we're seeing these parallel systems being set up to run right along the U.S.-dominated SWIFT. There's BRICS itself, there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The world is learning how to get along without the United States of America. And it's because of these harsh economic policies of the United States, this attempt to drag the world back to hegemonic domination of the US dollar. And the global economy is reorganizing itself into a whole new form that will have this dark hole in the middle where the US dollar used to be. That's how this is going to end up. The US cannot wage war against the entire planet. And the rest of the world knows it. Now, the US still has its ace in the hole, the nuclear weapons and the threat to use them. All right, we're going to take a break here for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Russia's getting ready to dump more U.S. treasuries in a retaliation against the sanctions.
Were established to benefit the American people.
Okay, and there we are. They're going to dump more U.S. treasuries in retaliation against the sanctions. And the Russian finance minister is saying they may abandon the dollar in oil trade as it has become too risky. So already we're seeing the repercussions of this sanctions war. Okay, now, apparently the U.S. and Turkey have now declared economic war, and the presidents of both countries rhetorically declaring economic war on each other, and of course over a single day, the Turkish lira lost 17% of its value, and early signs of panic have spread to world financial markets. It really is getting crazy out there. And Turkey is approaching the point of collapse, and Erdogan is blaming the currency decline on the USA, and he's absolutely right. Now, here in the United States, U.S. spending on interest hits an all-time high. More Americans are defaulting on their credit cards. We're in a debt trap. We're in a hopeless debt trap. And we were put in that trap a little more than 100 years ago with the creation of the Federal Reserve. And it was intentional, because the bankers used that awareness of debt to control people, governments, entire nations. Now, Elon Musk may be in a little bit of trouble. As you know, he rattled the markets early last week with an announcement that he was going to take Tesla private in a leveraged buyout that was going to cost a huge amount of money, and basically said that he already had funding from Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia's PIF and SoftBank are saying, no, they were approached, but they're not interested. And this puts Elon Musk in trouble because, well, his own investors have filed a lawsuit against him, saying he's basically committed fraud, and he may be in trouble with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Turning to the world of immigration and refugees here. Over in Finland, police are looking for foreign-speaking suspects after the gang rape of a woman. And the left is already out there trying to blame the victim, because we're supposed to feel sorry for the refugees. It really is getting ridiculous and out of hand with all this stuff. All right, Congressman Biggs has introduced the Fund and Complete the Border Wall Act. Now, remember, Trump said he was going to get Mexico to pay for the wall, and Mexico is saying, no, we will not do that. But Biggs' act basically will force that issue. And what it does is it penalizes foreign aid to Mexico and other countries from which illegals are coming by $2,000 for every illegal alien that is apprehended. And the held back funds are redirected to the Border Wall Fund. One of the other aspects of this act is that all money transfers to receivers outside the United States from the illegals are charged an added fee that goes to the Border Wall Fund. So they're finally starting to get that thing done. Now, Friday night, there was an interesting incident up in Washington State. Richard Russell, a 29-year-old Horizon Air employee, basically hijacked an airplane, 76 plane, was completely empty at the time, was in a maintenance area of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in Washington, which locals refer to as SeaTac. And he then flew the aircraft on a 90-minute joyride before crashing it into a remote island. And experts are saying, how could this baggage handler hijack the empty aircraft? Well, it turns out the large commercial passenger jets don't have keys, which was a surprise to me, because when I took flying lessons, all those many years ago, the small aircraft had keys. You had to put in the key and turn it on to get the aircraft up and running. But apparently the large aircraft are considered immune from that sort of thing. Well, they certainly learned a lesson on that one. Now, if they're all closed up, it takes a key to get in there. But if the hatches are already open, or if they're not locked, and you can get into the cockpit, and the cockpit doors have keys and locks on them because of the potential for hijacking. But apparently it was in the maintenance area, and he just walked into this area and grabbed the plane and took off. Now, in the transcripts of the communication with the tower, where they're trying to basically talk him into landing the airplane again, it turns out this guy flew a lot of flight simulators. And obviously he knew enough about the aircraft to get this twin-engine turboprop off the ground and up in the air, gear up, and basically flew it rather adventurously, at one point doing a loop-the-loop. Now, it turns out this guy was feeling that he had been discriminated against for being white, and he had a very good education, couldn't get a job. He and his wife started a bakery, but that went out of business in the plunging consumer economy, and working as a baggage handler at the airport was the only job he could find. And so I guess he just snapped, and he grabbed the airplane, and he flew around until he was on the edge of running out of fuel, and then he augured into this sparsely populated island. Nobody else was hurt but him. And of course, he died instantly. Now, remember back when 9/11 happened, and the head of the EPA stood there and lied to the first responders that the air around the ruins of the World Trade Towers was perfectly safe and they didn't need special breathing gear. And a lot of people, well, a lot of those first responders, most of them, came down with very serious permanent illness like mesothelioma from all the asbestos that was in that building. Well, somebody has done a study of where else that dust went and who else got sick. And it's now estimated that 10,000 New Yorkers basically got cancer from breathing that dust. In fact, the exact number they found was 9,795 first responders and other New Yorkers with cancers deemed 9/11 related. But we got the nation all riled up to go after Osama bin Laden. That makes it okay here. This one's a little upsetting. This is from campusreform.org. A recent survey found that many Americans are unable to name a single one of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. And there are, of course, 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. And 40% of the people surveyed were unable to list any of the 5 freedoms. 36% could list just one. So what are the schools teaching Americans these days? Because when I went to school, we had to memorize the Bill of Rights. Schools today are failing the younger generation. They're teaching conformity, obedience to authority, and not a whole heck of a lot of anything else. We know the government wants the Bill of Rights and the Constitution to go away. We're hearing more and more politicians saying, really, we shouldn't let this document from 240 years ago be controlling our lives today. This is usually coming from progressives. And they're actually saying that they don't want the Supreme Court to be slavishly devoted to the Constitution. Well, folks, that Constitution is the original contract with America. It's the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to manage our sovereignty. And they're not allowed to just throw it away. Because the authority of the government rests on that Constitution. If there's no more Constitution, then government is illegitimate. If they're not conforming to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it is illegitimate. Now, the other day we were talking about this piece that came on out in the corporate media chastising the state of New Hampshire for having too many white people. And it was very uncomfortable for Hispanics moving to the state because they couldn't find other Hispanics to talk to. And New Hampshire people, by and large, don't speak Spanish. Oh, woe was us, woe was us, woe was us. Well, now over at Wikipedia, they have declared Spokane, Washington, as being too white. So they're really pushing this agenda to just blend all the ethnic groups together, to destroy our cultural, regional, historical sense of identity. And people really don't like that. Over at the NFL, and I can't believe this is still an issue, apparently a lot of the NFL players are still kneeling during the playing of the national anthem. It's actually in the NFL rules. It was in the NFL rules before this even became an issue, that during the playing of the national anthem, you stand and face the flag and you stand at attention. But apparently these players are still kneeling. Trump is still very upset about it. So are the fans. And apparently NFL fans are starting to burn their merchandise in disgust over the anthem protests, which the sellers of the merchandise don't care. They got their money for it. But apparently a lot of upset NFL fans are boycotting their teams and burning their expensive memorabilia in response to this. Now, one of these fans, Robert Williams of Texas, burned over $1,000 worth of Steelers gear while slamming his favorite team. We stand for this country. We have morals in this country. Another one of the fans was out there saying, "My great uncle's bones are lying at the bottom of Pearl Harbor." It's gone on way, way too long. All right, so we're going to finish up the show talking about what's going on with the deplatforming of InfoWars, Alex Jones, and the blacklisting of conservatives or independent thinkers is basically what it is. Vimeo has now joined Facebook, Apple, YouTube, and the other tech giants in banning InfoWars, Alex Jones from its platform. Article coming out of The Guardian, basically saying the public execution of InfoWars is dangerous and counterproductive. And what is really alarming is how many Americans, mostly liberal, are out there saying this is a good thing. This is a good thing. We've got to shut down speech we don't agree with. Now, this is all about the First Amendment. And the First Amendment guarantees the right to freedom of speech, the right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. That is a founding part of what makes this country America. And it's very alarming how many liberals just want to throw that away. Want to take the Bill of Rights and throw it in the shredder. Don't like the Second Amendment, we're going to get rid of it. Don't like the Fourth Amendment, get rid of it. Don't like the First Amendment, we're going to get rid of it. Now, ad platform Criteo has caved to mob outrage. They have also banned InfoWars. So we're going to have to get out there. We're going to have to support Alex Jones. And it's not because I agree with Alex Jones. In fact, we have one major area where we don't agree. But this is not about Alex Jones, and it's not about InfoWars. It's about freedom of speech. It's literally a fight for our freedom to put our opinions out there on a par with government propaganda and political speech coming from Democrats. That's what it's all about here. Now, there's some good news here. And apparently, the InfoWars app is trending. It has become one of the hottest apps in the country. People are just downloading it. They're installing it. They're going to get their InfoWars fix. And according to the Alexa rating site, InfoWars website traffic has just exploded. And as I mentioned on Friday, we're dealing with the banned in Boston effect. Oh, InfoWars was banned. Well, let's go on over there and see what all the fuss is about. Now, I think what InfoWars and any of these websites that are getting deplatformed need to do is have a banner on their site saying, if you like one of our articles, please post it yourself to Twitter and Facebook. Because Twitter and Facebook can't just start deleting posts and tweets by everybody. People will quit using those platforms that much faster if they can't express what they want to express. Facebook is out there bragging that they can change any public opinion. This appeared in Zero Hedge. Well, Facebook is not supposed to be in the business of changing public opinion. They have definitely stepped outside their original business model. And I don't understand why Trump isn't stepping into this. Trump knows that it was the independent reporters. It's inexcusable. It's a betrayal. And I don't understand why Trump isn't doing something about it, because without the independent media, he's going to be toast in 2020. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program today. We're talking about computers. And apparently, cyber criminals are using Facebook's Messenger to trick people into opening malicious links that harvest their personal data. This is a warning coming from the FBI. And apparently, the message tries to trick you into opening a malicious URL that harvests your personal data and login credentials for social networks. And although the original warning from the FBI highlighted Facebook Messenger as a particular platform of concern, this has since been amended because the scam is now being found on other rival platforms. Now, it's unclear how many people have been hit by this scam or how exactly cyber criminals are generating their revenue. Well, my guess is they're simply selling these credentials on the dark web. There's another report that's come on out. This is in the Daily Mail, and it concerns fax machines. Apparently, fax machines are, or at least this is the claim. I'm not sure I buy this one, but apparently experts are saying that somebody could fax a piece of paper with some white and black dots representing malicious code to your fax machine, and it would be uploaded to the fax machine's memory, at which point it would activate and go out across the net, the local net, and attack your computers. The reason I have a problem with this one is the aliasing issue. Fax machines, especially older ones, the type doesn't come through all that clear, and very often you can see the scan lines. The second issue is, how does data being held in the memory of a fax machine somehow get the signal to execute? So this warning is coming from Checkpoint, which is a cybersecurity firm in Israel. And I don't know, maybe they're trying to get people to buy new fax machines or something. All righty. Apparently, the federal government is spying on federal staffers. Several federal agencies have purchased an advanced software application that allows administrators to see every single action, item, mouse click, and more performed on their employees' computers. And some say it's being implemented to end whistleblowing. Now, there is a witch hunt going on targeting anyone accused of leaking documents, and the U.S. federal government has been linked to a massive acquisition of spyware that allows the higher-ups to get a hold of essentially any communique and comment made by its employees on any electronic device. Well, I got to tell you, not that the U.S. federal government would ever offer me a job, but I would turn them down. And again, it's not because I'm doing anything wrong. I'm just a very private person. I don't like those data collection cards. I don't like my information getting on out there to the telemarketers who are all ignoring the do not call list here. Now, here's a warning sign here. A month before the election, Sweden's leftist government obtains the right to silence their critics on Facebook. And you can just bet that's going to show up here in the United States. All right, there's the music time for me to get on out of here and get on up to the Jim Goddard Show. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. Use email, face-to-face, and this is a fight to get the truth out against the tsunami of corporate and government lies. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.